Clara always believed that love could change people. She had seen it soften anger, bridge distance, and heal broken hearts, but she was starting to learn that sometimes even love was not enough to make someone see what truly mattered. When she married Richard Beaumont, she knew she was stepping into a very different world. He was already a billionaire by the age of 38, known for his sharp mind and colder heart. The newspapers called him a genius, a visionary businessman, a man who could turn anything he touched into gold. But behind the glamour and money, Richard carried a sense of control that reached every part of his life. Clara, on the other hand, came from a modest background. She was a teacher before she met Richard, a woman who believed in kindness more than power. Their meeting had felt like something out of a story. Richard was captivated by her simplicity and warmth, and Clara saw something lonely and wounded beneath his confident surface. She told herself that she could bring light into his world, and for a while she did. The first year of their marriage was calm. They lived in his grand estate on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by walls so tall they almost touched the clouds. Clara filled the house with life, flowers, laughter, music. But slowly she began to see that Richard's heart was not as open as she hoped. He liked order, perfection, and appearances. He wanted his world to look flawless, like one of his expensive boardrooms. And Clara's warm, messy way of loving didn't fit neatly into that world. Still, she tried. She smiled at every party, spoke kindly to every guest, and listened to Richard's endless business talk, even when her heart longed for something simpler. But what she wanted most, more than all the wealth and comfort around her, was a child. Clara had always dreamed of being a mother. She believed in the beauty of guiding a young soul, of seeing the world through innocent eyes again. But after years of trying and facing disappointment after disappointment, she knew it wasn't going to happen naturally. One morning, while volunteering at a local orphanage, Clara met a little girl who changed everything. She was sitting alone by the window, her small hands tracing invisible patterns in the air as if she were playing a silent instrument. Her name was Amara. Her deep brown eyes carried both pain and strength, and her quietness seemed to hold a story that no one had taken the time to hear. When Clara sat beside her, the girl barely looked up. But after a few moments of silence, she whispered, "Do you like music?" That was the beginning. The orphanage caretaker explained that Amara was 8 years old and had been there since she was 4. Her mother had passed away and no relatives came forward. Many families had visited over the years, but no one had chosen her. Some said she was too quiet, others thought she was too shy. But Clara didn't see a shy child. She saw a spark waiting to be understood. When Amara played an old keyboard in the corner, Clara felt her heart melt. The music was gentle, filled with emotion far beyond her years. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. Every note seemed to tell a story that words couldn't express. Clara couldn't stop thinking about her. That night she told Richard about the girl. He barely looked up from his laptop. "You went to that place again?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "I met someone. Her name is Amara. She's wonderful, Richard. She's kind and she loves music. I think I want to adopt her." He finally looked up, eyebrows raised. "Adopt?" He said the word like it was foreign. "Yes," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've wanted a child for so long. She needs a family, Richard. We could give her that." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Clara, let's be realistic. You don't just bring home a random child from an orphanage. We have a life, a reputation." "And you said she's from where?" "From here," Clara replied quietly. "She's local," Richard frowned. "You know what I mean," his tone stung. Clara knew exactly what he meant but didn't want to hear it out loud. "Richard," she said gently, "she's a child. She just needs love. That's all." He shook his head. "I'm not interested in being part of some charity project. You can donate money if you want, but don't bring that into our home." Clara looked at him for a long time. There were moments when his face seemed made of stone, unreachable. This was one of those moments, but something in her heart refused to give up. Over the next few weeks, she kept visiting Amara. They played together, read stories, and sometimes just sat in silence while Amara played the keyboard. The girl didn't talk much, but when she smiled, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Clara knew deep down that this was her daughter, even if Richard didn't see it yet. After a month of paperwork and persuasion, she finally brought Amara home. The day the car pulled into the mansion's long driveway, Amara's small face pressed against the window, eyes wide. The house looked like a castle, with tall pillars, glass walls, and a fountain that sparkled under the sunlight. She clutched her small backpack tightly as if afraid to let go. Clara reached over and held her hand. "This is your home now, sweetheart." Amara nodded but didn't speak. When they entered the grand hall, Richard was standing near the staircase. His expression was unreadable. He looked at Amara for a moment, then at Clara. "So this is her," he said flatly. Clara smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Richard, this is Amara. Amara, this is—" Before she could finish, Amara gave a small, polite bow. "Hello, sir," she said softly. Richard's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but something closer to disbelief. "You can take her things upstairs," he said to the maid, then walked away without another word. The silence that followed was heavy. That night, Clara tucked Amara into bed in her new room. It was big, too big for one small child. The walls were pale blue, the curtains silk, the bed soft enough to sink into, but Amara's eyes darted around uncertainly. "It's okay," Clara whispered. "You're safe here." Amara nodded. "He doesn't like me," she said quietly. Clara's heart tightened. "He just doesn't know you yet," she said. "Give him time." But time did little to change Richard's heart. Days turned into weeks, and Richard barely spoke to Amara. When he did, his words were distant. He hated the noise of the piano when she practiced. He hated the small mistakes she made during dinner. He hated how Clara always defended her. One evening, when Clara and Amara were baking cookies in the kitchen, Richard walked in. The room smelled of sugar and laughter. Amara had flour on her nose, and Clara couldn't help but smile. But Richard frowned. "Clara, this isn't a playground," he said sharply. "Do you have to make a mess every time you cook?" "It's just flour," Clara said softly. He looked at Amara. "Don't you have homework or something?" Amara's smile faded. She nodded and quietly left the room. Clara turned to Richard, her eyes disappointed. "You could try being kinder," she said. Richard sighed, frustrated. "I didn't agree to this, Clara. I didn't agree to turn my house into a daycare." "She's our daughter now," Clara said firmly. "You could at least treat her with respect." "She's your daughter," he replied coldly. "Not mine." That night, Clara cried quietly while Amara slept. She felt torn between the man she loved and the child who needed her. She thought love could bring them together, but instead, it was tearing them apart. The next morning, she found Amara sitting at the piano in the music room. Her small hands were gently pressing the keys, creating soft, broken melodies. Clara listened from the doorway, tears in her eyes. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Amara turned slightly. "I heard music in my dreams," she said. "It sounded like this," Clara smiled. "Keep playing, sweetheart. Music can make sad hearts softer." For Amara, the piano became her world. Every night, when the house was quiet, she played. Sometimes slow, sometimes bright, always filled with feeling. Her music filled the emptiness in that cold mansion. One night, Richard heard it. He stopped outside the room, listening. For a brief second, he seemed almost moved, but then he shook his head and muttered, "Noise." He didn't realize that the very sound he called noise was what would one day change everything. Clara watched Amara grow more confident with each day. She still struggled to make Richard smile, but she found happiness in small moments. Morning hugs, bedtime stories, music lessons. Amara started to laugh more, talk more, and even joke with the maids. But Richard stayed distant. He avoided her school events, skipped family dinners, and refused to acknowledge the small achievements Clara proudly celebrated. One afternoon, Clara tried again. "She's performing at the community center next week," she said as Richard read his newspaper. "Just a small recital. I think it would mean a lot if you came." He didn't look up. "I have meetings." "You always have meetings," Clara said, her voice breaking slightly. "She notices, you know," Richard sighed. "Clara, I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not." "I'm not built for this." Clara looked at him sadly. "No, Richard. You just don't want to try." As she left the room, he stared at the door for a long time, something unreadable in his eyes. In the quiet that followed, the faint sound of piano drifted through the hall again. Soft, gentle and full of life, maybe deep down, even Richard could feel something shifting. But he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Amara's world began to change slowly, like the first light that sneaks through dark clouds after a long storm. She had lived in the mansion for months now, but it still didn't feel like home. The house was beautiful, yes, big, shiny, and filled with things that most people only saw in magazines. But beauty meant little when hearts were cold. Richard's presence still frightened her. He rarely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were short and sharp, like doors closing. He never shouted, but his silence carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. He didn't see her as a person. He saw her as a mistake his wife refused to undo. But Clara was different. She was warmth. She was patience. Every morning she knocked gently on Amara's door with a smile and a tray of breakfast. "Good morning, sweetheart," she'd say softly. "How did you sleep?" Some days Amara answered with a nod. Other days she only smiled. But every time Clara's kindness felt like sunlight through a window, something steady she could hold on to. Her favorite room in the mansion was still the music room. It had tall glass walls and a grand piano that seemed to breathe life when she touched it. The first time she played it, she had been scared. It was too big, too shiny, too perfect for a girl who'd learned on a broken keyboard. But as her fingers touched the keys, she found herself again. Music didn't care who she was or where she came from. It didn't ask her to be anyone else. It only asked her to feel. Every note she played seemed to tell her story. Her fears, her hopes, her loneliness. It was her secret language. Clara would often sit in the corner quietly listening. Sometimes she cried without even realizing it. "She plays from her soul," Clara said once to the piano teacher she'd hired. "I've never seen anything like it." The teacher, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Linton, smiled warmly. "This child is special," she said. "She doesn't play music, she becomes it." Clara's heart swelled with pride. She wanted the world to see what she saw in Amara, a quiet miracle. But Richard didn't see it that way. He passed by the music room one afternoon, his phone pressed to his ear. The soft sound of piano followed him down the hallway. He frowned and closed the door halfway, muttering, "That noise again." When Clara confronted him later, he simply shrugged. "It's not suitable for this house. She should be focusing on something useful, not wasting time playing." "Music is useful," Clara said gently. "It's her way of expressing herself. You should see how happy she is when she plays." "I don't need to," he replied coldly. "You wanted her. You deal with her." That night Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes she wondered how the same man who once looked at her with love could now look at her daughter with disgust. She wanted to believe there was still a good heart, buried somewhere inside him, but it felt harder every day. The next morning Amara came into the kitchen while Clara was preparing breakfast. "He doesn't like me," she said softly, almost whispering. Clara stopped stirring and turned to her.
"He doesn't know how to show love, that's all," she said gently.
"Some people take longer to understand what love really means." Amara nodded but didn't look convinced. "I'll just stay quiet," she murmured. "Maybe he'll forget I'm here." Clara hugged her tightly. "No, my darling. You don't hide your light for anyone. One day even he will see how special you are." Weeks passed. Amara practiced every day, her fingers dancing across the piano keys like magic. Mrs. Linton often said she had an ear for emotion, something that couldn't be taught. She started teaching Amara small classical pieces, and within days she memorized them. "You're a natural," the teacher said, amazed. "It's like you've been playing your whole life." When the lessons ended each week, Clara would clap softly, her heart full. "You were wonderful," she'd say. "I'm so proud of you." Those words became Amara's strength, but Richard's indifference didn't go unnoticed. At dinner, when Amara tried to tell him about her lessons, he would cut her off. "I'm busy," he'd say. "Ask your mother to listen." One night, Clara lost her patience. "She looks up to you," she said firmly after Amara had gone to bed. "You could at least pretend to care." Richard set down his glass. "I'm not pretending anything. I'm being honest." "Honest?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "Honest or cruel?" He looked at her unblinking. "I built this life, Clara, every part of it. And now it's turning into something I don't even recognize. I didn't sign up to be some kind of—" He stopped himself. "Some kind of what?" Clara asked softly. He said nothing. Clara shook her head. "You know, for a man who has everything, you seem so afraid of love." Her words hung in the air long after she left the room. For the next few days, Richard avoided both of them. He buried himself in work, traveling frequently, leaving early and coming home late. The mansion felt emptier when he was gone, but also more peaceful. In his absence, Clara and Amara grew closer. They cooked together, laughed together, and spent long evenings in the garden. Amara had started writing her own little songs, soft tunes about hope and belonging. Clara sometimes hummed along. One afternoon, while Amara was playing, the housekeeper, Mrs. Grant, peeked in. "She's got a gift, ma'am," she said. Even the birds outside stopped to listen. Clara smiled. Yes, one day the world will hear her. And she meant it. But not everyone was ready to listen. A few days later, Richard returned from a business trip. When he entered the mansion, he heard music again, stronger, more confident this time. He followed the sound to the music room. Amara was sitting there, completely lost in her world, her hands moving gracefully. Richard stood at the door, arms crossed. He waited until she finished, then spoke. "Don't you have homework?" Startled, she jumped slightly. "Yes, sir," she said quickly. "Then maybe you should do that instead of making noise," he said, his voice flat. Amara lowered her eyes. "Sorry." Clara, who had been watching from the hallway, stepped forward. "Richard," she said firmly. That wasn't noise. That was music. He turned toward her. Music doesn't pay bills. It doesn't build companies. It doesn't change the world. Clara's eyes narrowed. Maybe not the way you think it does. But it changes hearts. Isn't that worth something? He didn't reply. He just left the room. Amara's small hands trembled. "I didn't mean to make him angry," she whispered. "You didn't," Clara said softly, hugging her. "He just doesn't understand yet. But he will." The following week, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Linton entered the house one morning, smiling brightly. "There's going to be a local music event," she said. "A small recital for young students. I think Amara should play." Amara's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes, you," Clara said, smiling proudly. "You're ready," but Amara shook her head. "He won't like it." "Let me worry about him," Clara said. "You just focus on your music." The next few days were filled with practice. Amara played from sunrise to sunset. Her fingers grew sore, but her determination didn't fade. She wanted to make Clara proud. Every wrong note made her try harder. Clara watched with admiration. Sometimes she thought, if only Richard could see her like this, so full of life. But when she mentioned the recital to him, his reaction was exactly what she feared. "You can't be serious," he said. "You want her to play in front of people? What if she embarrasses herself?" "She won't," Clara said. "She's talented. She's a child," Richard replied coldly. "This isn't some fairy tale." Clara's patience finally broke. "No, Richard. This isn't a fairy tale. This is real life. And in real life, people can be cruel or kind. It's a choice. Right now, you're choosing the wrong one." He looked at her, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. She had always been gentle, but now there was steel behind her words. "I'll take her to the recital," Clara said. "With or without your support." Richard didn't stop her. But he didn't wish her luck either. The night before the event, Amara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her small hands clasped together. "What if they don't like it?" she asked softly when Clara came to tuck her in. Clara sat beside her. "You don't play to make people like you, sweetheart. You play to tell your story. When you do that, people will listen." Amara smiled faintly. "I'll try." The next morning, the sun rose bright and golden. Clara helped Amara into a simple blue dress and braided her hair neatly. She looked like a little star ready to shine. Before leaving, she glanced toward Richard's study. The door was closed. She didn't knock. At the recital hall, Amara sat quietly, waiting for her turn. Children laughed and tuned their instruments around her. Clara held her hand tightly. When Amara's name was called, she walked to the stage, her heart pounding. The piano looked enormous under the stage lights. She took a deep breath, sat down, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then the music found her again. Her fears melted away, and her fingers moved like they had a mind of their own. The melody flowed with emotion, soft, powerful, and pure. When she finished, there was silence. Then applause. Real, loud, heartfelt applause. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She looked around, proud and moved. But what she didn't know was that Richard, on his way to a meeting, had stopped by the hall's entrance out of curiosity. He stood there in the shadows, watching her play. For the first time, he didn't see the girl his wife brought home. He saw a child who had something rare, something money could never buy. He didn't say anything that day, but when he returned home that night, he sat alone in the darkened living room replaying the melody in his mind. It was the first time in a long while that something had truly moved him. Amara's piano recital had left Clara glowing with pride. She still remembered the way the room went silent, the way the music filled every heart. Even strangers had stood up to applaud, some with tears in their eyes. It was a moment Clara would never forget. But the person she wanted most to notice hadn't said a word. Richard had watched from the shadows that day, unseen by both of them. He didn't approach afterward, didn't clap, didn't even send a message. He simply walked away as if nothing had happened. Yet something inside him had shifted, even if he didn't admit it. For days afterward, Clara sensed a strange quietness in him. He was less harsh, less impatient. Sometimes when Amara played the piano in the evenings, he would pause at the end of the hallway, listening for a few moments before walking away. It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara hoped it meant he was finally beginning to see. One afternoon, Richard came home earlier than usual. His driver pulled up to the mansion just as Amara was returning from her lessons. She was carrying her music notebook, humming softly. When she saw him step out of the car, she froze for a second, unsure what to do. Richard glanced at her, then at the papers in her hand. "Practicing again?" he asked, his tone flat but not cruel. Amara nodded shyly. "Yes, sir." He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead just nodded once and walked past her. For the first time, he hadn't dismissed her. That night, Clara mentioned it with a hopeful smile. "You spoke to her today?" Richard shrugged. "It was just a question." "But still," Clara said softly, "that's more than before." He didn't respond, but she saw the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or confusion. He wasn't ready to change, but he wasn't the same man he'd been either. Weeks later, the house was full of movement. The staff cleaned every corner. Decorators arrived with boxes of flowers, and catering teams discussed arrangements. Richard was hosting a major company gala, his biggest event of the year. Important investors, politicians, and business leaders were flying in from all over. It was going to be an evening of elegance, power, and status. Everything Richard lived for. Clara helped as much as she could, though her heart wasn't in it. She had never liked these events. They were full of people who smiled too easily and talked too much about money. But she stayed by Richard's side because it mattered to him. Amara watched from the sidelines, fascinated by the transformation of the house. Workers carried in shining chandeliers and trays of golden dishes. "Is it someone's birthday?" she asked innocently. Clara smiled. "No, sweetheart. It's one of your father's company parties. A very big one." Amara's eyes widened. "Can I come?" Clara hesitated. "Well, it's not really a party for children. But maybe you can stay for a little while and listen to the music." Amara's face lit up. "I can play something?" Clara's heart skipped. "Oh, that's a lovely idea," she said softly. "But I'll have to ask him first." Later that night, when Richard sat in his study reviewing guest lists, Clara entered quietly. She waited for him to look up. "I wanted to ask something," she began. Richard sighed, leaning back in his chair. "What is it?" "I was thinking, maybe Amara could play a small piece at the gala. Just one song during dinner." "Nothing long." He looked up sharply. "Absolutely not." "Richard, this isn't a children's concert, Clara," he interrupted. "It's a formal event. Important people will be there. I won't have a little girl playing piano like it's some talent show." Clara's voice softened. "She's not just any little girl. She's our daughter. And she's extraordinary. You've heard her play." He stared at her for a moment, expression cold. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I've worked too hard to build this image, and I'm not going to risk it over your sentimental ideas." Clara's heart sank. "Richard, she's not an embarrassment. She's a gift." But he had already returned his eyes to his papers. End of discussion. Clara left the room quietly, holding back tears. She knew arguing further would only make him angrier. Still, her heart ached. She wanted Amara to feel proud, to feel seen. The next day, Amara asked, "Did he say yes?" Clara smiled faintly. "Not yet, sweetheart. But don't worry. Sometimes it takes time for people to change their minds." Amara nodded, though her face fell slightly. "It's okay. Maybe next time." The week before the gala, Richard was busier than ever. Every detail had to be perfect, down to the color of the tablecloths. He met with designers, chefs, and security teams. It was all about control, all about showing the world that the Beaumont name meant perfection. Clara watched him from a distance, wondering how someone could have everything yet still seem so empty. On the night before the event, the house was quiet. Everyone had gone to bed except Amara. She sat in the music room playing softly under the dim light. The melody was gentle, full of longing. She didn't know that Richard had stopped in the hallway listening. Something about the sound made him pause. The music wasn't loud or grand, it was simple and pure. Every note carried emotion he couldn't quite explain. He stood there for a long time, his face unreadable. When the music stopped, he cleared his throat and stepped into the room. Amara turned quickly, startled. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to wake anyone." He shook his head. "You didn't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he walked closer to the piano. "You like playing this?" he asked. She nodded. "It helps me feel not alone." Her answer hit him harder than he expected. He looked at her small hands resting on the keys. "You're very good," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but something made him stop. "Do you know what you'll play next time?" he asked. She smiled a little. "I'm making one up. It's called Home." Richard didn't respond. He just nodded slightly and walked away. But for the first time, he didn't feel annoyed. He felt something else, something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. The next morning, as Clara prepared for the gala, she noticed Richard seemed distant, thoughtful. During breakfast, he finally spoke. "If she really wants to play," he said, not looking up from his coffee. "She can. One song. No more." Clara froze, unsure she'd heard him right. "You mean it?" He nodded. "But it needs to be short. And decent," she smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." That night, the mansion came alive. Cars lined the driveway, glittering under the lights. Guests arrived in expensive suits and elegant gowns. Laughter echoed through the grand hall. Music played softly in the background as waiters served champagne. Clara moved through the crowd gracefully, greeting guests and keeping everything running smoothly. But her eyes often drifted toward the hallway where Amara waited nervously, dressed in a simple white dress. "Are you ready?" Clara whispered, kneeling beside her. Amara nodded, clutching her hands tightly. "My stomach feels funny," Clara smiled. "That just means your heart cares." When it was time, Richard took the microphone to welcome everyone. He spoke confidently, charming the crowd as he always did. Then Clara stepped forward gently. "Before dinner begins, we have a small surprise," she said with a smile. "Our daughter Amara would like to share a short piece on the piano." A ripple of polite curiosity moved through the crowd. Some smiled kindly. Others looked surprised. Richard forced a calm smile, though his jaw tightened slightly. Amara walked onto the small stage, her steps slow and careful. She sat at the grand piano under the soft lights. For a moment, the room was silent. Then she began to play. The first notes were gentle, like the sound of rain on glass. Her fingers moved gracefully. Her face calm but full of emotion. The melody grew deeper, stronger, filled with something raw and real. It wasn't just a song, it was her story. The room changed. Conversation stopped. Glasses were lowered. Every person in that grand hall turned toward the little girl and listened. Clara stood near the back, her heart pounding, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Even Richard couldn't look away. His chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, guilt, wonder, all tangled together. When Amara finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then applause, loud, genuine, endless applause. People stood to their feet. Some even shouted, "Bravo!" Amara looked up, startled, her eyes wide. Clara rushed forward, wrapping her in a hug. "You did it, sweetheart," she whispered. "You were amazing," Richard approached slowly. The guests were still talking excitedly about the performance, calling it unbelievable and beyond her age. He stopped in front of Amara, his expression softer than ever before. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, he said, "You played beautifully." Her lips curved into a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." He hesitated, then added, "You can call me Dad." Her eyes filled instantly with tears. "Really?" He nodded once. "Really?" Clara covered her mouth, unable to stop her own tears. That night, after the guests had gone, the house felt different, warmer, lighter. Amara sat at the piano again, playing softly, while Richard stood behind her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. For the first time, they looked like a family. The house felt different after the night of the gala. For years it had been a place filled with silence and distance, but now, the sound of piano keys drifted through its halls like a heartbeat. Amara's music had changed something in everyone, especially Richard. He wasn't the same anymore. The morning after the gala, he came down for breakfast later than usual. Clara was already there helping Amara pack her school things. They were laughing quietly about something, and for a brief moment he just stood in the doorway watching them. It was such a simple scene, yet it filled him with a strange warmth. When Amara noticed him, she stopped and smiled shyly. Good morning, he replied. His voice was softer than before, and Clara noticed. Her music began to reach people in ways she never imagined. Local teachers and musicians often invited her to play at events, and audiences would sit in complete silence, moved by the emotions she poured into every note. People often said her music didn't just sound beautiful, it felt beautiful. Richard began to travel less. The man who once lived for meetings and business trips now preferred to stay home. He would watch Amara practice, help Clara in the garden, or sit with them at dinner sharing simple stories about his day. He had learned to enjoy the quiet moments, something money could never buy. One evening, a letter arrived from a prestigious music academy. Clara opened it while Amara sat beside her, curious and nervous. As Clara read the words aloud, tears filled her eyes. They want you to audition for their youth program, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Amara's mouth dropped open. Me? Yes, you, Richard said with a proud smile. They saw your performance online. Someone recorded your concert in the city and shared it. Amara's hands shook as she held the letter. She couldn't believe it. The academy was known around the world for shaping some of the greatest young musicians. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. Her tutor helped her choose a piece that showed her best skills, something that spoke from the heart. She practiced every day, sometimes until late at night, but Clara always reminded her to rest and eat. Richard, too, was by her side. He arranged everything she needed, from travel to the best piano tuning. He didn't talk much about it, but inside he was nervous for her, more nervous than he had ever been for a business deal. The day of the audition arrived. The Academy's concert hall was enormous, with tall windows and golden lights. Amara walked in wearing a simple white dress, holding her music sheets tightly. Clara held her shoulders gently. Just be yourself, she whispered. Play with your heart, Richard added. And remember, no matter what happens, we're proud of you. Amara nodded and stepped toward the stage. When her turn came, the room went quiet. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody started softly, like a whisper. Then it grew, full of warmth, hope, and courage. Each note carried her story, a story of love, of being accepted, and of finding a family that believed in her. The judges listened with eyes closed. Some smiled. One even wiped a tear. When she finished, there was silence for a moment. Then applause filled the hall. Amara stood, bowed slightly, and walked off the stage with trembling hands and a shy smile. Clara hugged her tightly, whispering, "You were perfect." A week later, an email arrived. Amara had been accepted. Clara cried again, and Richard lifted Amara in the air, spinning her around as she laughed. "You did it," he said proudly. It was one of the happiest moments of their lives. As months passed, Amara joined the academy. She practiced with world-class teachers, met other young musicians, and performed in concerts that reached international audiences. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot where her journey began. She always came home to the mansion that had once been silent, but now overflowed with music. Richard and Clara attended every performance they could, sitting in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. One night, Amara was invited to play at a national event honoring young artists. The concert was televised and millions of people would be watching. When Clara told her, Amara felt nervous again. "What if I make mistakes?" she said. Richard smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mistakes don't erase talent. Just play the way you always do, with love." The night of the performance arrived. The stage lights were bright and cameras surrounded her. She took her seat at the piano, closed her eyes, and thought of her family, of Clara's kind smile and Richard's proud eyes. Then she played. The melody was one she had written herself, called Home. It told a story through music, a journey from loneliness to love, from silence to sound. Every note touched hearts across the audience and beyond. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was so loud that Amara could hardly hear her own heartbeat. Tears ran down her cheeks as she bowed, and for a brief moment, she saw her parents standing in the front row, Clara clapping with both hands over her heart, Richard smiling with tears in his eyes. The next morning, newspapers and TV channels were talking about her performance. "The little girl whose piano spoke of love," one headline said. People were touched not just by her talent, but by her story. When a journalist asked Amara what inspired her music, she answered simply, "My family. They taught me that love can change anyone, even the hardest heart." Richard watched that interview later, sitting in his study. Her words echoed in his mind. Love can change anyone. He leaned back in his chair, eyes wet, thinking about how true that was. He remembered the day he first saw her, how distant he had been, how blind to her worth. If someone had told him then that this little girl would one day be his greatest joy, he wouldn't have believed it. But now he couldn't imagine life without her. That weekend, they celebrated again at home. Clara cooked a big dinner and Amara baked a small cake herself, shaped like a piano. "It's not perfect," she said, laughing as she placed it on the table. "It's wonderful," Richard said, cutting a piece and tasting it. "Just like your music." As they ate together, the room was filled with warmth and laughter. There were no walls between them anymore, only love. Later that night, after Amara had gone to bed, Richard and Clara sat by the fireplace. The glow of the flames danced on their faces. "She's growing so fast," Clara said softly. "It feels like yesterday she walked into this house for the first time." Richard nodded slowly. "She changed everything," he said. "I used to think success was about money and power. But now I know. It's about love and what you give to others." Clara smiled and leaned against him. "And you've given her more than you know." He looked toward the piano across the room. "She gave me something too," he whispered. "She gave me a heart." Years later, Amara would become a professional concert pianist. Her name appeared on posters and programs around the world. People admired her not only for her incredible talent, but for the kindness and humility she carried everywhere she went. Every concert she played ended the same way, with one song called Home. Before each performance, she would tell the audience, "This piece is for the woman who believed in me, and the man who learned to listen." And every time she said those words, somewhere in the crowd, Clara and Richard sat side by side holding hands, their eyes full of pride. Their story had begun with misunderstanding, but it ended with music, the kind that heals, unites, and speaks to the soul. The mansion where once there was silence now stood as a home filled with life, laughter, and songs that would never fade. Because sometimes, the most powerful changes in life don't come from money or fame. They come from love, pure, patient, and unconditional love that turns strangers into family and a cold house into a home.